Of all the Capcom vs. games, when I think of weird, totally unexpected character appearances, the first Marvel vs. Capcom game is always the first to spring to mind for me, and no other character is more emblematic of that to me than Captain Commando. Captain Commando was originally conceived by the US branch of Capcom as a sort of mascot, appearing in instruction manuals for Capcom games in the late 80s, thanking the player for purchasing the game. His first design is, well, it's a lot different than the one he's known for today. If it wasn't already obvious, taking the first three letters of Captain and Commando spells out Capcom, a fitting little quirk for a fictional company spokesperson. Capcom itself is short for Capsule Computers, the former name of the company. Capcom also had a record label they released game soundtracks under until about 2012 or so, Super, which cheekily is just the leftover letters from taking Capcom out of Capsule Computers. Back on track here, Captain Commando was redesigned again in 1989, sporting a more detailed, realistic look along with what looks like some kind of alien monkey. Neat. Capcom artist and character designer Ackerman, finding the Capcom USA design to be uncool, redesigned him for his eventual self-titled 1991 game, giving him an American comic book aesthetic. Elements of his design, including the futuristic gauntlets, were taken from a scrap design for a character named Future Fighter J, before the decision was made for the then-in-development beat-em-up to use the Captain Commando character. In the not-too-distant future, the world is rampant with crime, and in no place is this more evident than future Metro City. I guess the more things change, the more they stay the same, huh? Captain Commando, along with his three companions, Ginzu, Mac, and Babyhead, rise up to stamp out those who would perpetrate these crimes, and that would eventually lead them to Scumocide, the super criminal behind it all. Captain Commando was a fairly standard 3-player beat-em-up that played similarly to earlier brawlers like Final Fight. It got a port to Super Nintendo fairly late into that console's lifespan that goes for ludicrous prices on the secondhand market. Later on, it got a nearly arcade-perfect PS1 port only released in Japan that also goes for ludicrous prices. Thankfully, it started being included in Capcom arcade compilations during the PS2 and Xbox era, and most recently was a part of the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle, as well as a purchasable game in Capcom Arcade Stadium. Though he made a few assorted cameos in other Capcom arcade games, Marvel vs. Capcom 1 is the game that largely resurrected the character from obscurity, even positioning him as one of the game's two headlining characters, opposite Spider-Man. Captain Commando is one of a handful of characters in the game on the Capcom side whose theme isn't an arrangement of a song associated with the character from a previous game, but an entirely original track instead. That said, it's a pretty great theme that puts those CPS2 brass samples to work in a pretty great way. I imagine this is probably coincidence more than anything, where the portion of his theme actually sounds nearly identical to a character theme from the previous Versus game. Captain Commando's voice actor here and in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is Takashi Nagasako, whose work spans many roles across Japanese media, but most prominently, he's been the Japanese voice of Dodoria from Dragon Ball Kai onwards, Donkey Kong, and Big the Cat since the early 2000s, and as far as Capcom games are concerned, was the voice of Bowman and Gan in Rival Schools. Funnily enough, he also did voice work for the Japanese dub of X-Men the Animated Series. Before we get into his moveset, I want to talk about his character design in this game, as there's some easily overlooked little nods to Japanese pop culture that are likely lost on the majority of English-speaking audiences. First, his visor. In all of the art for the original game, as well as some more recent art, his visor is generally colored blue. His in-game sprite did have it colored red though, and the Marvel vs. Capcom 1 design gives him a red visor as well. But it's likely that the color change had less to do with adhering to the original sprite and is instead a reference. Take a look at his pre-fight intro, where he uses the visor to transform into his superhero persona. This is more than likely homaging the Japanese Tokusatsu hero Ultra 7, who uses the same method to transform. Take a look at his taunt. Seems kind of random at first, but this one's actually another Toku shoutout, this time to Kaikatsu Zubat, a wandering hero who, after the death of his best friend, goes out and fights injustices. The guitar isn't just for show either, it's where he keeps his suit. Capcom's never been shy about homaging anime, manga, toku, and everything in between in their games, but the mid to late 90s is where they did it the most, and Marvel 1 is one of the biggest examples. Maybe something to talk about in another video. I also like to mention his win quotes, since they harken back to the original US persona that he was created for in the first place. He has one win quote thanking the player for playing the game, as he did in the Capcom manuals. And also drops a bit of Capcom trivia in another one quote. With all that said, time to get into the moveset. Captain Commando, coming from a beat-em-up game, transitions pretty naturally into a fighting game moveset, and a lot of his abilities in the original game get carried over to Marvel vs. Capcom intact, if not amped up a bit. First off is Captain Fire, a full-screen burst of flame fired from his gauntlet done with a quarter circle forward and punch. In his original game, this could be done by attacking in the air from a dash. Next up is Captain Corridor, done with a quarter circle back and punch. This is an anti-air with a massive vertical hitbox. This one's based off of his Captain Collider grounded special attack in the arcade game. Next is Captain Kick, done with a quarter circle back and kick. Commando leaps forward and does a flaming kick. This one is named after his dash attack in the original game, though it has a flashier, more dynamic animation. His old Captain Kick animation from the arcade game did get snuck in the Commando's moveset as his standing medium kick though. Quarter circle forward and kick is Captain Strike, which summons a member of the Commando squad for a quick assist attack. Which member comes in is based on the strength of the kick button pressed. Light Kick has Ginzu come out with a leaping sword attack, based on his jumping sword attack from the original game. I want to talk about Ginzu for a second here, since he's actually involved with a more obscure part of Capcom lore that ties the Captain Commando series to the Street Fighter shared universe. Ginzu, or Sho as he's named in Japan, is a childhood friend of Captain Commando and is trained in Bushinryu, the same fictional fighting style used in the Final Fight and Street Fighter games. Ginzu is the son of Go, the 40th Bushinryu master who was a student of and eventually succeeded the 39th Bushinryu master, Guy. Go had actually never shown up in a video game before and was only ever referenced in art books and magazines that unfortunately never left Japan. That is, until Street Fighter 6. Go is mentioned by Kimberly as someone she came across during her Bushinryu training. He easily beats her, which makes sense since he'd go on to become the succeeding master of the style. So, despite taking place in the future, yes, Captain Commando is actually a part of the Street Fighter shared universe alongside Final Fight, Saturday Night Slam Masters, Rival Schools, and possibly Strider and Red Earth. We don't have definitive answers on those two yet. Also, Pirate Ship Higemaru, an older Capcom arcade game whose main character, Momotaro, almost got into Street Fighter V. He got passed up in favor of Birdie though. Though, the director of Street Fighter V and VI and one of the major driving forces behind Street Fighter recently having more interconnected lore, Takayuki Nakayama, has affirmed that Momotaro has fought Ryu at some point in the past, so he's out there somewhere in the Street Fighter universe as well. There's an even deeper rabbit hole related to Pirate Ship Higemaru that involves Ruby Heart of all characters, but that's probably best saved for the eventual Ruby Heart analysis video, and I'm already way off track as it is. In short, Captain Commando is linked to the Street Fighter universe through its use of Metro City and Ginzu. Next up, Medium Captain Strike has Mac the Knife, or Genity as they are called in Japan, to do an aerial spinning attack that arcs across the top half of the screen. The spinning attack in question is Mac's grounded special attack from the original arcade game. Last on Heavy Punch is Babyhead, or Hoover as he's known in Japan. He fires a missile from his mech and rides on it before comically being thrown right back into his mech from the missile explosion. Captain Commando's first hyper combo is Captain Sword, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 punches. The Commando team group up and form a giant energy sword that comes crashing down on the opponent. This does a lot more damage when the opponent is in the air, though it should be mentioned that this move's damage in general is a tad inconsistent, since it depends entirely on where your opponent is when they get hit by this. Captain Commando's second hyper combo is Captain Storm, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 kicks. Commando dashes forward and attempts an uppercut. If it hits, the combo transitions into a brief cinematic of the other Commando striking your opponent before Captain Commando comes crashing down with a Captain Corridor and posing with the rest of the squad. Here are Captain Commando's colors. Here's Captain Commando's ending. His ending is a neat little recreation of the ending from the original arcade game, which plays out in exactly the same fashion. Captain Commando is mostly the same in Marvel 2, though he does notably have to be unlocked in all but the now delisted HD ports of the game. His main difference this time around is with Captain Strike, which had its input shuffled around a bit as a result of the loss of medium buttons. Mac is now called with Heavy Kick, while Babyhead is now called with Light Kick and Heavy Punch. Considering he was pretty good in the first game, being largely the same sounds like it'd be good news here, but now that Commando has to contend with characters with way crazier mobility in Marvel 2 compared to the first game, he suffers a lot here, at least as a point character. If you're using him competitively, there is one true reason to use him: his anti-air assist. Captain Corridor is a contender for being the best assist in the game thanks to its speed, its vertical range, and its versatility. It's a great get-off-me tool. It can be used to snipe characters like Storm that prefer to run away to the skies, and does a decent bit of damage as well. This is balanced out by the fact that you're essentially giving up a viable character slot for this assist, but it's so good that top players don't even think twice about running teams that include him specifically for this assist. Captain Commando's other assists are Captain Fire, and Captain Kick. If you're going to use him, it's at least worth mentioning that he has a pretty easy guard break setup when snapped in opponents. After snapping an opponent out, use a heavy Captain Corridor just before your opponent comes in. You'll know you did it right if your opponent guards but gets pushed off screen briefly and forced into a defenseless freefall animation. Immediately cancel into a Captain Storm for a free hyper combo. You can also OTG after Captain Storm as well if you want to tack on some additional damage. It's not much, but hey, Commando can use any advantage he can get on point. Guard breaks exist in Marvel 2 because characters in the air can block or perform any specific action only once in the air. Guard breaks are essentially attacks to force a tagged in or snap-backed character to block one incoming to use up their aerial actions. They will briefly be put into a defenseless freefall state as the game readjusts their position, opening them up to attack. Here are Captain Commando's colors. Let's be real here, Captain Commando is cool. His trajectory from a Capcom USA manual flavor character to a brawler protagonist to a fighting game character is about as interesting as they come. And he really does work well in Marvel vs. Capcom as the closest equivalent to a Capcom superhero, outside of maybe Mega Man and Beautiful Joe. He'd be used in crossover games not developed by Capcom years down the line, most notably in Namco Cross Capcom and later on in the same continuity in Project Cross Zone 2. He's also a Heroes vs. Herald card in Ultimate Marvel 3 and cameos on the Days of Future Past poster as well. Nash got a Captain Commando costume in Street Fighter V that's pretty neat, as well as a new move and obvious send-up of Captain Corridor. He was used prominently in the marketing for the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle, even showing up in the live-action advertisement for it. If Capcom ever decides to do another Versus game, as unlikely as the possibility feels right now, I hope they'd bring him back. I think it'd make a lot of people, including myself, happy. That's gonna do it for this video. Thanks as always for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.